Major Viktor Kuzmin sprints in at 80 nautical miles off Crimea, missiles hot, expecting a panicked American response. He gets one, but not the one he trained for. The Gravely never blinks, never broadcasts, and never fires. Instead, its electronic warfare suite paints a false target and a wall of phantom missiles on his scope. With one launch, a 7-foot decoy hovers over the sea, dragging his seekers away. We'll walk the timeline of this encounter second by second and show why speed of information outpaced speed of weapons. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How did Gravely know what Kuzmin carried before anyone saw his jet? The answer starts long before a radar screen lit up. Over the Black Sea, 80 nautical miles off Crimea, the destroyer held its course while Red 32 came in fast and heavy. The Su-30 SM wasn't cruising. It was burning hot, pushing into the outer edge of weapons range with pylons loaded and tanks topped to stay on station. That mattered, because in a fight where a fighter can throw a missile beyond visual range, the first system to build a clean picture wins. A ship that lights its radar too early shows its hand. A pilot that trusts his sensors too much can miss the trap. The U.S. kill chain began above the clouds. Space-based infrared sensors flagged a bright ingress. Not a routine patrol profile, but a climb and push with the engines in military power. Then a short burst to close the gap. That IR trace drew the first line. Next, overhead imagery cued analysts to the loadout. Hardpoints filled, wing stations carrying long sticks, centerline stores that suggested endurance and a specific mission. The weight and spacing on the pylons told a story. If you've stared at enough silhouettes, you can sort likely missile types before a radar return hits a display. That went into the threat file without a single watt of shipboard radiation. While that was happening, an E-2D Hawkeye orbiting far to the northwest swept the littoral with its UHF radar and pushed clean Link 16 tracks into the network. The destroyer didn't need to spin up its SPY array to know where Red 32 was and where it was going. Every update tightened the ellipse, refined the speed gate, and smoothed the altitude. On Gravely's scope, the air picture built itself from off-board sources. The ship stayed silent, but the timeline kept getting sharper. Cooperative engagement capability fused all of it. Instead of one platform guessing based on partial data, the network treated sensors in the theater like a single organism. The destroyer's combat system ran the math on intercept geometry using the Hawkeye's track, space IR timing, and overhead imagery cues. With no organic emissions, it could still generate firing solutions and hold them in memory. That's the quiet advantage. The enemy sees nothing new, but your firing keys are already filled. Inside combat, Aegis Baseline-9 stacked the deck. 18 intercept solutions sat ready. Angles, lead points, seeker timelines, and mid-course updates mapped and waiting. The SM2s in the cells needed only the go code. But emissions control stayed tight. No broad search, no hard lock. The defense held its breath while the picture matured. So, how close did the fighter get? Close enough to force an electronic warfare posture. Tight enough that timelines mattered and reaction windows shrank. But still outside the point where steel needed to fly. The rails on Red 32 stayed cold. The geometry never gave him the clean, unambiguous targeting he wanted against a ship that hadn't blinked on his scope. And that payload question? Gravely detected it pre-visual because the network stacked 3 kinds of truth. Space IR said a hot jet was inbound on a purposeful profile. Overhead imagery confirmed the pylon count and likely missile families. The E-2D fed range, bearing, altitude, and speed through Link 16, letting the combat system correlate everything and tag the threat with confidence before the pilot ever crossed the merge. With the threat mapped and the missiles still sitting on the rails, Gravely reached for a different trigger. The next move wouldn't be a plume from a VLS cell. It would be a signal that changed what Kuzmin thought he was seeing. What does a warship fire when it decides not to fire a missile? On Gravely, the answer came from a console marked for electronic warfare. Instead of opening a cell, the crew keyed the AN's SLQ-32V and started shaping what the pilot believed he saw. Non-kinetic first. The ship stayed radio silent, kept the SPY array quiet, and let the EW suite do the talking. In seconds, waveforms went live, timing offsets locked in, and the surface of the sea became an arena of signals rather than steel. Kuzmin expected a radar spike or the white-hot climb of a missile leaving a vertical launcher. He got neither. His scope bloomed with a return that sat a few miles off where the destroyer should have been. The offset was small enough to feel plausible, large enough to break the geometry that builds a clean firing solution. The track quality he needed to commit went soft. Range gates drifted. The velocity readout started to wobble against his last good sweep. For a pilot trained to trust the sensors, this was the wrong kind of surprise. The spoof worked by bending what his radar reported, not by shouting it down. SLQ-32 fed timing and amplitude tricks into the air, manipulating the apparent angle so the phantom contact held steady while the real ship slid low and quiet. The false echo carried the right rhythm to look like a hull with a turning prop and a live radar. But the energy came from the Gravely's EW racks, not from the ship's own array. That moved Kuzmin's cursor off the truth and forced his systems to chase a ghost. Then the layer cake went up. The EW operators stacked simultaneous waveforms that mimicked inbound threats, seeded short-lived returns that looked like small missiles accelerating in, and laced the spectrum with cues that pulled his radar warning receiver in too many directions at once. Now his radar showed a target offset from the last known position, while the RWR shouted about emitters that didn't match the picture. Each false cue had a believable signature and a decay that felt real. None of it led him to a shot. Gravely added hardware to the mix. A canister bucked, and a 7-foot Nulka decoy punched up, tipped, and settled into a steady hover downrange. It began radiating a ship-like signature tuned to look cleaner and closer than the destroyer. The decoy didn't just shout loud. It produced a coherent, attractive target that tracked like a fat radar cross-section. For any seeker searching for strength, stability, and proximity, Nulka was the prize. That is where sensors start to disagree. A radar seeker or a fighter radar wants the brightest, closest, most stable return. An IR seeker wants hot metal and plume. With Nulka radiating and the ship keeping emissions low, the radar picture favored the decoy while infrared cues stayed faint and inconsistent. The two channels no longer matched. Correlation broke. A missile launched now might go where the math said best signal, not where the hull actually sat. Workload spiked in the cockpit. Conflicting tracks filled the display. The RWR chirped about fresh threats that didn't line up with the moving blob he had been building a plan around. False missile alerts appeared and cleared. The decoy's steady lure drew the radar cursor even as the real ship slipped out of the clean zone for a quality shot. In that window, the smart play was to abort, reset, and try again later with a better setup. The most effective shot of the day was data. The EW suite stripped targeting quality. Nulka stole the seeker's attention. Kuzmin eased off, turned cold, and broke contact rather than feed a missile into a mirage. As Red 32 exited, Gravely kept the spectrum alive just long enough to finish logging every change in his emissions and store the fingerprints for the next run. Information outran ordnance here. The ship turned a missile problem into a targeting problem the Su-30 couldn't crack, and it did it with timing, fusion, and restraint. As one analyst put it, the speed of information is definitively more important than the speed of the bullet. That lesson is reshaping doctrine and raising the value of electronic warfare across NATO fleets. Next time, we'll show how the same tools don't just defend ships. They map an opponent's emissions for future fights, signal by signal.